My name is Rachel Monroe, and the night I begged my parents to help save my daughter's life, I was soaked to the skin mascara running down my cheeks and clutching hope like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I still remember the marble tiles of their mansion's foyer, the way my boots squeaked as I crossed the threshold rain, dripping from the hem of my coat. Their Tudor-style estate sat just outside Seattle, all polished brass and cold elegance. But that night, it felt more like a museum of ghosts than a home. I had barged in during my brother's engagement party, interrupting laughter champagne toasts and a string quartet playing something classical and unfeeling. My mother, Judith Monroe, saw me first. Her smile froze halfway through a conversation with someone from her garden club. She crossed the room in her navy blue gown like she was floating on ice. "Rachel, not now," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "This is Marcus's night." My father, Charles Monroe, appeared behind her the way he always did when things got tense. His silver beard and cufflinks tried to lend him grace, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "Let's talk in the study," he muttered, steering me through the gawking crowd. The study smelled like leather and old money. Books lined the walls, unread but pristine. I stood there shivering and dripping on their antique rug. "It's Zoe," I said, my voice cracking. "She collapsed at school. She's in critical care. They say she has a heart defect, and without emergency surgery within 48 hours, she might." I couldn't finish. Just the image of her lying in that hospital bed, 6 years old, and so small, made my knees buckle, but I forced myself to stay upright. Charles frowned. "What about insurance?" "I don't have any right now," I whispered. My last big project fell through. I was going to restart the policy next month when the new contract came in. Judith's expression turned stony, arms folded beneath her pearls. I cleared my throat. "I need 70,000. I've tried everything. Loans, banks, the hospital's payment plans, they'll only cover part of it. Please. She's your granddaughter." I got down on my knees, something I swore I'd never do again in that house. Not even when I left home at 19, after they refused to support my interior design school dreams because they didn't think it was a real profession. My mother didn't move. She just sighed. "We've already committed to Marcus's wedding. The venue, the caterers, the honeymoon, $250, 000, non-refundable." Before I could even react, my brother Marcus Monroe sauntered into the doorway, his champagne flute swinging between his fingers. "Trying to make this about you again, Rach," he said. "It's always some crisis with you." "Not now, Marcus," I said, my voice tight. Charles nodded, almost businesslike. "We've made our choice, Rachel. We're sorry. Maybe you should have planned better." A part of me shattered then, not just because they refused, but because they didn't even flinch. Like this was just another financial inconvenience, like my daughter wasn't flesh and blood. I pulled the sapphire bracelet from my mother's wrist, the one she always promised would be mine one day, and placed it in her hand. "Take it back," I said, rising to my feet. "I'll find another way." I walked out into the rain, past the whispers, past the pitying stares, and into the night. Mark was waiting in the car. He didn't ask what happened. He just reached for my hand and whispered, "We'll find a way." "We always do." But as I stared back at the glowing windows of the mansion, I felt something inside me go cold. And it wasn't the rain. It was the realization that the people who raised me had never actually seen me. And they never would. Back at the hospital, Zoe looked impossibly small against the white sheets, her tiny chest rising and falling under a tangle of wires and monitors. I held her hand, willing her to stay to fight. We had 36 hours. The next morning, Mark, my husband, left the room, quietly said he was going to make more calls, see if there was any charity or loan program that might reconsider. I sat by Zoe's side, rereading the estimate for surgery costs. It was still $72,800. When Mark came back, he looked different. Pale, quiet. "I have something to tell you," he said, and took a deep breath. "I sold the garage." I blinked. "What? What garage?" He gave me a sheepish smile. "My father left me a muscle car. 1,000. 969 Dodge Charger. Been sitting in that old garage for years. I barely talk about it because it's just sentimental. But it turns out, collectors pay a lot for sentimental. I stared at him stunned. You sold it. For $65,000, he said. And I pulled the last $8,000 from my retirement. We have enough. She's going to get the surgery. I started sobbing. Loud guttural sobs that frightened a nurse into rushing in. I laughed through the tears as Mark hugged me tightly. That was the moment I understood what love was: not the polite charity of blood relatives, but the sacrifice of someone who would sell their memories just to make sure our daughter lived to make her own. The surgery went ahead within 24 hours. It was risky, but Zoe pulled through. When she opened her eyes and looked at me confused but alive, I knew the world had changed. Recovery was slow but steady. I returned to interior design little by little, taking on small jobs while staying close to Zoe. My clients were mostly referrals from nurses, other moms, even the hospital janitor whose kitchen I redesigned pro bono, just because I needed to feel useful again. That kitchen changed my life. 3 weeks after posting a before and after on Instagram, I got a DM from someone named Madeline Frost, founder of an up-and-coming eco-luxury hotel chain. She'd seen the post and wanted to know if I'd be willing to submit a design proposal for her new flagship in Jackson Hole. I thought it was spam, but I replied anyway. 4 months later, I was standing in the lobby of the Frost Lodge, overseeing the final touches of a design that would be featured in Architectural Digest. They called me a visionary grounded in warmth. All I did was pick out the rugs and believe again. I never told my parents. They never called after that night. Not even when Zoe sent them a Christmas card with her drawing of a heart that said, "Thank you for helping me." Oh wait, you didn't. I didn't help her write that. But I didn't stop her either. Mark framed it. Said it was the most honest piece of art we owned. We were happy. Not rich, not flashy, but full, real. Until one day, 3 years later, my phone rang, and the name Mom lit up the screen for the first time in years. She was crying. Not performative crying either. This was raw. Desperate. "Rachel, please, we need your help." Turns out my parents were broke. Marcus's wedding ended in divorce within 8 months, and he sued them for breach of a trust agreement. Charles made some bad investments: oil, cryptocurrency scams, and a startup that claimed to turn ocean water into clean fuel. They'd mortgaged the house, drained their accounts, and were now facing foreclosure. "We have nowhere to go," Judith whispered. "Marcus won't take us in. He blames us for everything. We need a place to stay. Just for a little while. Please, Rachel." I didn't answer right away. I just stared out the window of my new design studio, rented but beautiful Zoe's latest drawing taped to the edge of my monitor. It was a family. Stick figures. 3 people all holding hands. I let the silence stretch. Then I said quietly, "Let me think about it." Because I wasn't the same woman who once begged on my knees in their study, and this time they were the ones standing in the rain. I didn't sleep that night. Mark and I sat on the back porch, coffee gone cold between us, as Zoe slept upstairs in her galaxy-painted room, her heart healthy, her breath steady. "They're your parents," Mark said gently, "but they left you outside in a storm when your child was dying. You owe them nothing." I stared at my hands, now calloused from years of sketching, lifting furniture, and chasing a life no one ever handed me. "I know," I said. "But I also know what it feels like to be desperate." I didn't make my decision for 2 more days. When I did, it was with absolute clarity. I invited them to Lunch Neutral Territory, a modest cafe in downtown Bellevue. They arrived looking like hollowed-out versions of themselves. My father's suit was wrinkled. My mother's pearls were gone. They ordered conservatively. Water. Soup. I let them talk. Judith tried to smile through her shame. Charles kept glancing around as if someone he knew might see him and whisper. "We're not asking for a handout," he finally said. "Just a temporary roof over our heads." I nodded. I understand. Then I reached into my purse and slid a small envelope across the table. Judith opened it. Inside was a list of local shelters and food banks, plus the number of a job placement counselor I'd once met through a hospital fundraiser. Charles's face twisted. What? What is this? It's help, I said calmly. The kind you gave me that night. They both stared at me stunned. Judith opened her mouth, then shut it again. I continued. You once told me everything in life is about choices. So here's mine. I'm choosing to protect the family that protected me when you didn't. I'm choosing to remember that when my child was dying, you chose flower arrangements and lobster risotto over her heartbeat. They looked old then, not just tired, defeated. Before they could speak, I stood. I hope you find peace, I said, but you'll have to find it without me. And I walked away. 6 months. Later, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for my first full residential development, eco-luxury homes inspired by single mothers, each one named after a flower. The model unit was called the Zoe. There were cameras, journalists. A small nonprofit is there to honor us for including 6 units reserved for low-income families, rent-capped and fully furnished. I wore a blue dress, the same shade as the one my mother had worn that night years ago. Zoe stood beside me, clutching my hand, beaming with the kind of pride that makes your soul ache. Mark kissed my cheek. You did this, he whispered. And maybe I did. Not just the buildings, the career, or the stability, but I rebuilt myself. I built a version of Rachel Monroe, who no longer needed approval from broken people, who only knew how to count dollars, not measure love. They say family is blood. But I've learned family is who shows up when it rains. And my daughter. She'll never wonder where her family is when she cries. She'll never kneel at someone's feet and beg to be seen. Because I've taught her to build her castle and to never let anyone else hold the key. 3 years later, I got an invitation in the mail. Cream cardstock, gold foil edges. The handwriting was unmistakably Judith's, looped, elegant, and careful. It was for Marcus's second wedding, to a woman named Brinley. Destination Tuscany. Dress code formal, with vintage accents. There was even a line at the bottom that read, "We hope to reunite with family and heal old wounds." I laughed, out loud, for a long time. Then I slid it into the recycling bin and took Zoe out for ice cream. That same night, I posted a photo on my design firm's social media, me and my team standing in front of a new project in Aspen, an artist's retreat for women starting over. The caption read, "From blueprints to breakthroughs. Here's to women who rise without permission." It went viral. But more than the likes or comments, what stuck with me was one private message from a woman in Kansas City. She wrote, "My parents cut me off when I kept my baby. I've been trying to make it work, but today I wanted to give up. Then I found your post. Thank you for showing me what's possible." I cried when I read it. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded me that pain, when shared honestly, becomes a bridge for someone else. My parents never recovered their fortune. Last I heard, they'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom condo outside Spokane. Judith was teaching piano again. Charles was consulting for a small business network. They never apologized. But they sent Zoe a birthday card that year. No money, no empty promises, just a drawing of a butterfly with "Keep Growing" written inside. Zoe showed it to me without a word, then taped it next to her desk. And that was enough. Not a grand gesture. Just a small, quiet acknowledgement that maybe they'd started learning something too. So here's the truth: I don't believe in fairy tale endings. I believe in earned peace. In chosen families. In hard conversations and soft landings. In planting gardens in the ashes of everything that went wrong. And I believe that when people show you who they are, you believe them. But you can also choose who you become after that. I'm not a victim anymore. Not a daughter begging to be loved. I'm Rachel Monroe, mother, builder, survivor, and the architect of my own damn life. It's funny how the quietest days are the ones that make you reflect the most. Zoe turned 11 last weekend. We didn't throw a big party, just a backyard cookout with her best friends, some fairy lights, and a lemon cake she helped bake. She asked for new markers, a sketchbook, and a hoodie with pockets deep enough to hide snacks. After the guests left and Mark was cleaning up the grill, Zoe tugged at my sleeve. "Mom," she said, "do we have any pictures of Grandma and Grandpa?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I needed to decide what kind of story I wanted to tell. "We do," I said finally. "They're in the drawer in my office." "Why?" She shrugged. "I think I want to draw them, like who they are now." "You know," from what I remember, I nodded. "That sounds like something they'd be proud of." She smiled and skipped away. That night I opened that drawer. The old photos were still there, Judith in pearls, Charles in his boat shoes, Marcus with his too big smile. But they looked like strangers to me now. I picked up a picture of myself from that engagement party, my eyes red mouth tight, the storm just about to hit. I didn't feel grief anymore, just distance. I placed that photo in Zoe's art folder with a note. "This was me once, but I grew stronger. So will you." The world tries to tell women like me that we should let it go, that forgiveness is the final chapter. But I've learned that sometimes peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from building something better in spite of it all. That's what I've done. Every client I help, every space I shape, it's all part of a story I reclaimed. Not for revenge, not for applause, but to make sure no one else ever has to kneel in the rain the way I did. Zoe's picture of my parents now hangs in our hallway. They have soft eyes, gray hair, and open hands. She titled it, "People Can Change." And maybe, just maybe, she's right. But I'm not waiting around to find out. I've got blueprints to draw, homes to fill with light, and a daughter who believes in butterflies. When blood fails, love builds. Rachel Monroe's story is not just about betrayal, it's about rebirth. At its heart, this is a journey of a woman who was abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, only to be rescued by those who truly did. When her daughter was dying, Rachel's wealthy parents turned their backs, prioritizing appearances and privilege over human decency. In contrast, it was her in-laws, humble, kind, and without the trappings of wealth, who sacrificed everything to save Zoe. That contrast became the blueprint for Rachel's life. Not just in terms of career, though. She built a design empire from the ashes, but in her emotional architecture. She learned to draw boundaries, to love without apology, and to rise without waiting for permission. What makes this story powerful isn't just the dramatic moments, the rejection at the party, the last-minute miracle, or the years-later reversal of fortune. It's Rachel's evolution from begging in the rain to becoming the kind of woman who builds safe spaces for others, literally and metaphorically. Forgiveness for her didn't mean inviting toxic people back into her life. It meant letting go of the need for their validation. It meant understanding that family is who shows up when it's hard, not who shares your last name. Her daughter Zoe becomes the quiet triumph of this story. An artist, a survivor's child, and a symbol of the future Rachel chose to fight for. This isn't a fairy tale. It's something better, a woman who took heartbreak and used it as raw material to create something lasting, honest, and full of light. In the end, Rachel didn't. She designed